then what does the Muslim Council of Britain go and do? If not, prove every anti-Muslim stereotype that is out there. Let me explain why. You can't argue with one side of your mouth that Muslims are part of Britain, part of our nation, part of this country, and then set up a rival counter-extremism plan in isolation from the rest of the country's plan. You can't argue on the one hand that Muslims are loyal Brits and yet refuse to cooperate with the existing plan of our government while arguing that we are loyal to the state, and then wonder why people consider us to be Trojan horses. You can't argue, on the one hand, that the government's plan targets Muslims, when in fact it also targets those on the far right of the extreme, and then set up your own plan that does precisely that by only targeting Muslims, quote, from your plan, by working with mosques, which you claim are at the heart of the community, when in fact the vast majority of those who are radicalised don't get radicalised in the mosques these days anyway. You can't argue, on the one hand, that Muslims aren't extremists, that all Muslims aren't extremists, and then, in your own counter-extremism plan, make it very publicly known that you plan to work with extremists because you think the best way to stop terrorists is by working with those who have homophobic, anti-Semitic and other bigoted, anti-woman views. And yet you're wondering why people think all Muslims are extremists when you're prepared to work with extremists to stop terrorists. Let me ask you, MCB, and if you're listening, and by the way, we have asked you on this show, you've refused to attend. You've refused to stick up for yourselves. And I'm asking you again, if you're listening, don't be cowards. Come onto this show and defend yourselves. Because I'm a Muslim, and I'm actually personally quite offended by the fact that you're making us all look like a bunch of extremists. You can't argue that it's okay to work with extremists to stop terrorists, and then imagine the reverse of that. If the government started working with the BNP to stop far-right terrorists, how would everyone else, how would we feel? How would you feel? How would every single ethnic minority in this country feel if people were telling them it's okay to work with racists to stop violent racists? So, I think that people have to reconsider this view as to what liberal means. But anyway, we have Sean on the line from Guildford. Go for it, Sean.
I sort of wanted to talk about what I believe will happen if you work with people who aren't necessarily violent but are still Islamist. If you look at sort of the history of the jihadist movement, it didn't spawn out of, let's say, this great outpouring of violence in sort of the 1920s. It started in the sort of formation of the Muslim Brotherhood under Hassan al-Banna.
Yeah.
And it's not until someone like Saeed Qutb comes along and starts about, the recreation of Muslim power that we start getting ideas of conquest. So if you're going to work with people who are Islamic extremists but not necessarily violent, that's going to eventually manifest into violence in the same way that in Bavaria in the 1920s, an anti-Semite wouldn't necessarily have been talking about the conquest of Russia and the liquidation of the Slavic population, but if you sort of found your communities upon the idea that you can sort of view yourself as superior to other people, eventually you're going to arrive at violence.
Yeah, and Sean, look, I, for the life of me, it's so frustrating that people immediately see this analogy when it comes to anti-Semitism and racism, and yet with Muslim communities, somehow there's a bigotry of low expectations, that the same liberal standards they will hold the rest of society to, they don't apply when working with Muslim communities. Now, I'm not saying don't talk to extremists. Let me pass this out very, very carefully. I'm saying who does the talking when they engage with extremists? Those people, the interlocutors themselves, must not be extremists. Yeah, it's fine that they're not violent, but look how low our bar has sunk. Anyone can condemn ISIS. Even Al-Qaeda, for God's sake, condemns ISIS. That doesn't mean suddenly Al-Qaeda are moderate. So when we're looking at the interlocutors who are doing this engaging, they mustn't hold anti-gay views, they mustn't hold anti-Jewish views, they mustn't hold anti-woman views. Of course, they have to speak to people who hold those views. That's the very purpose of their counter-extremism work. I'd willingly speak to homophobes, speak to anti-Semites and speak to racists in an attempt to stop them being as such, but I'm not a homophobe, I'm hopefully not a racist, and I'm certainly not an anti-Semite. So I think, agreeing with you, Sean, we have to be very careful how we describe this. We're not saying don't talk to extremists. We're saying the people doing the talking mustn't be extremists themselves, and the MCB's got this all wrong, haven't they?
Yeah, and I think part of the problem as well is sort of the people who you want to talk to within the Muslim community. I think that it's a big mistake to necessarily define Muslims generally as sort of adherents to their faith, to collectivize them under the idea of...
Yeah, lots of people aren't. I'm not.
Yeah. What I mean by that, of course, is that if you're going to say to someone that you're part of the Muslim community, that's going to be the primary, thing that they self-identify with, as opposed to saying, you're an Iraqi or you're a Bengali or something like that. Yes. In the same way that if you look at Belfast, when you sort of define people as Protestant and Catholic...
Yeah, not everyone was a strict Catholic and not everyone was a strict Protestant. Sean, you made some excellent points. Promise me you're going to call in again another time.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much. That's Sean there from Guildford, and we have Rabia